This is JSCN with your host, Ed Horwich.
Hello and welcome to another episode of JSCN, Radio for the Jewish Small Communities. I'm Ed Horwich, and you're very welcome wherever you're listening. Maybe you want to email in to hello@jscn.org.uk and tell me where you are today. Where are you listening from? It'd be really good to hear from you. Coming up on the show, we have the Full Bagel. I've been up in Newcastle speaking to the Reform and the Orthodox communities. We'll be hearing from them later on. We hear part of the story of Helen Stein. She lived on the French-German border during the war and is a Holocaust survivor. We hear from a photographer, Mark Griffiths. He's about to do a project in the Welsh hillsides on Jewish refugees and Holocaust survivors, telling their story. But first, we're going to hear about something slightly different. A Jewish battalion fighting in the Finnish Army alongside the Nazis, against the Russians. Jake Berger came into the studio the other day to tell me all about it.
The history of the Finnish community is fascinating. Originally, the first settlement of Jews were cantonists from the Red Army.
When you say cantonists?
So that means that there were Jews who were, at age 15, were told that they're allowed to be citizens, but they had to fight for 25 years in the Tsar's army.
So just a short, inauguration.
So this was Jews and other malign minorities, so they became known as cantonists. And one of the places where after their service, 25-year service in the army, that they were allowed to settle was in what is now Finland. So you had a couple of settlements of Jews in Helsinki, in Turku, which is the second city in Finland, in Viipuri, which is now a part of Russia. And you had these settlements of Jews. They are the origins of the Finnish Jewish community. This was in the early mid-1800s, and then they were Yiddish speaking. Actually, the community in Finland is one of the communities that most recently stopped speaking Yiddish. So until the 40s, 50s, Yiddish was still very much spoken in Helsinki and the Jewish communities. 100 years ago, actually, exactly, I've been very lucky that there during my time in Finland, it's been a year of great celebrations in that December 1917, Finland became independent from Russia. Mm-hmm. And shortly after that, in January 1918, they guaranteed Jewish civil rights for the Jews of Finland. This was an act that was passed through Parliament after a few years of trying, and finally, shortly after Finland became an independent country, Finland's Jews too became emancipated and granted full equality under the law.
We forget about the fact that a number of European countries or Scandinavian countries actually are relatively young. We think they've always been there, like England has always been there, but they haven't really. They've changed hands, they've been called different things, they've been under the leadership of empires, the rule of empires, and also the rights of people. Some countries have been very early adopting. Some mainstream European countries were quite late, but some other small ones, like Finland, maybe gave rights to people earlier on than others.
It's true, and Finland itself is a young country, which makes its Jewish community also pretty young. With Finnish independence came the rights of the Jews, and I've been lucky enough that it's been the 100th anniversary of both of those events this year while I've been in Finland. So Finnish Independence Day is more of a Yom HaZikaron than a Yom Ha'atzmaut, as it were. It's
characterize that.
It's not so much about big parties and celebrations as it is a serious day, and I think that reflects the kind of nature of Finland's independence. And actually, it was very special as well, because in the Jewish community there was a commemoration held at the Jewish cemetery in Finland. And this is special because the Jewish fallen soldiers who fell in what is called in Finland the Continuation War, which was war in 1944 to 45, which was actually these Finnish Jewish soldiers were fighting alongside. Finland was fighting alongside Nazi Germany, and they were co-belligerents against Russia. And it's a very strange historical anomaly that most people aren't aware of. And there are amazing stories of these Finnish Jewish soldiers who actually, a group of them set up a field synagogue on the front line, kilometers away from where battalions of Nazi soldiers were stationed.
Amazing.
You hear these stories and it's crazy, but some of these stories say that the Nazi soldiers actually somewhat treated them with respect for their practices, which is crazy to think. But they weren't allowed to do anything. They weren't allowed to touch these Jewish soldiers, and the Finnish president at the time, Mannerheim, ensured that, and he shortly after the war visited the Jewish community to say thank you for the Jewish soldiers' service. I'm by no means an expert on the specifics of the history, but I know people still kind of live with this historical anomaly, and it makes a big part of their identities. And on Finnish Independence Day, there was a very moving ceremony to commemorate Finnish independence that also acknowledged the service of these Jewish soldiers in their fight for Finland. And until then, even though they were guaranteed, they were given civil rights, there was a kind of a sense that the community didn't feel fully Finnish. They weren't seen as Finnish by ordinary Finnish citizens.
Yeah.
But and as a result of that, they became seen as more Finnish, and actually that kind of coincided with Finnish being spoken more as the primary language in the Jewish community rather than Yiddish.
Fascinating history of Jewish life in Finland during the war, and a very different take on what it was like to be Jewish and fighting for your country.
And we're going to be hearing from Jake again in the future programme. He's going to be telling us all about his work for the JDC and the Entwine project in Finland, working with youngsters in the schools, supporting youth, and taking delegations off to Florida, meeting up with colleagues over in other Eastern European countries. Well, like I said, I've been getting around a little bit too. I went up to Newcastle a few weeks ago to spend the weekend, to spend Shabbat, Friday night and Saturday with the Orthodox and Reform communities there. And a very nice time it was too. They made me very welcome. Before we got into Shabbat, I took the opportunity to get the full bagel from Newcastle Orthodox community, the Newcastle UHC, and I spoke with Gerald and their president, Anthony, and they told me all about what it's like to be part of their community in Newcastle.
I'm Anthony Josephs, and I'm president of the UHC in Newcastle.
And I'm Helen Stein, I'm vice president.
We are about 200 people, but we are an extremely vibrant community. There are activities almost every day of the week. It's a great place to live and a lovely community to belong to. Unfortunately, it's declining.
Well, we're here in Gosforth, and it's really nice. Is this all where the Jewish community has always been?
The community started, I suspect, in the west end of Newcastle and migrated to Gosforth. But there are still people living in other areas of the town, Jesmond.
So there used to be a shul in Jesmond, is that right?
It's fair to say that in our youth there were 3 Orthodox synagogues.
There was one in town, Lees's Terrace,
Lees's Road,
near the football ground.
Yeah.
There was one in Jesmond, and there was one in Gosforth, but not this. And they were all facing the same problems. And in the 1980s, they came together and formed the United Hebrew Congregation.
Right, so when does this shul date
1986. I'm sure they wouldn't have foreseen in 1986 that in 2018 we would be getting ready to sell it.
So what do you think has brought about that sudden decline?
The kids of my generation didn't, by and large, stay in Newcastle, and then our children, those of us who did stay, those children didn't stay in Newcastle. They went off to university, and generally speaking, they don't come back.
I think a lot of it was influenced by a change in family businesses, children going into their father's businesses.
And did that stop?
That more or less stopped, and the young people went away to university, and sadly they never returned.
That's a common story
sure
across the country, isn't it?
Where we've always got sponsorship from companies, family businesses and so on. And they're just listed names now that are no longer here, sadly.
So I'm guessing the whole business side, the commercial side of Newcastle has changed radically.
This might be a microcosm of what's happened in Newcastle and the northeast in general, but the heavy industry effectively disappeared,
It's
the
all
mining
gone,
and the shipbuilding and so on, and it's been replaced by a digital age, and there are lots of bioscience, technology companies and so on, and it's up and coming in that respect.
Interesting. If you contrast it with Leeds, it's just starting, so people are telling me anyway, that their children who went down to London to university and started careers down there are now coming out of London and moving back to Leeds out of a financial choice, and the fact that they can both commute and there are actually jobs for them. And Newcastle is a vibrant city.
It is indeed, and my daughter's a consultant, an oncologist, and she could get an oncology post here, but she couldn't get a Jewish education for her children here. Her husband is a corporate lawyer. He could get a job here. But, they've got to get their friends to come back as well. Where's the social life now? Very sad.
You have a rabbi. When was the last wedding? When was the last bar mitzvah?
So there was a wedding a couple of years ago.
About 2 years ago.
But they, as you can see from the uncertainty, they're not a regular occurrence.
All right, so what about the other characteristics of Jewish life in the community? What do you do for kosher shopping?
Well, we have a facility within this building. We don't call it a shop.
It's like a club.
It's a service to our community. So we buy in from Manchester and London to serve the needs of the community.
And you've got Gateshead, which is just across the river.
We have. Lots of us do go there for the things that we can't get in the facility, but there are some who are unable to make that journey.
So it's a lot easier for them to have it
Indeed.
here.
And it's a huge facility for our membership.
And does that carry things like meat and stuff like that? Okay.
And we get a delivery of challahs and bagels and so on a Friday.
So what happens in the social life in the community?
We have a pretty vibrant
we do indeed.
social life. We just celebrated Purim with a wonderful
Chinese banquet.
Purim in Peking.
And it was catered by one of our members, one of our friends, who is a retired consultant surgeon, who's an excellent cook. And he made a superb banquet. It was really wonderful, and we had about 50 people there. An absolutely filthy night.
Yeah, we had snow on the ground. And
it's been snowy recently.
People
everywhere.
came, yes.
Yeah.
If you look at a week in the life of this building...
And we're talking about the communal building here rather than the shul.
Yeah. On Monday, we have a leisure group for the older members of the community. There's a lunch. There are often speakers of one sort or another. On a Wednesday, we have the drop-in, which is another luncheon club for the mainly older members of the community, but on a Wednesday when I'm not working, I go in as well. It's lovely. You meet lots of folk, and it's a very jolly atmosphere, and it's a fantastic service and a really lovely meal for very, very reasonable. And it gets people in here who don't perhaps come to the synagogue on a Shabbos morning, but I want to be still part of the Jewish community, which is really lovely. Thursday night in this room, there is a bridge club.
So you've got a real communal centre here.
Absolutely.
Where do people generally live? Do they live within a reasonable catchment area, or are they still living where they traditionally lived, perhaps when there were the other shuls that you mentioned?
No, I think they live within 20 minutes walk.
So within a mile?
And there are a few that live further afield. We've got one or two that commute from Teesside or Durham on a fairly regular basis, but the vast majority live here. Don't forget that there were a lot of outlying synagogues around Newcastle. There was Whitley Bay, South Shields, Middlesbrough,
Sunderland.
Darlington, Sunderland,
Sunderland,
etc.
yeah.
All of those communities have died.
Yes,
more or less. The members who have remained have come to Newcastle.
Yeah.
So that's my question.
Yeah,
so they've moved, they've migrated to Newcastle.
Or gone to London.
What would you say is the most interesting aspect of living in this community?
It's a very nice, friendly community. Most people know one another. We are resolute to try and keep this community going, and there's a nice communal atmosphere.
Very warm and friendly, and you feel as though you're part of a real kahilla.
What about the future of this community?
Well, the plan at the moment is to sell the synagogue and to retain the communal building which is adjacent to it and convert that into a synagogue and community hall and retain the other facilities that we have in that building, which will be fit for purpose. So the shul will seat the 100 or so people that we get once or twice a year. And will be a more intimate space.
And what about looking after the community? Because you say it's an ageing community and it will need more looking after, presumably.
There is a Jewish old age home in Newcastle.
How far away is that from here?
It's
a few hundred metres.
Yes.
Away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just round the corner.
And it's exceptionally well run and very much liked and very popular.
And is that independent of this?
Yes, it's another independent charity.
And I know there's a possibility of, on the site of the shul, that might turn into retirement.
Well, yes, that's true, but
that
it won't be a Jewish one, of course. And,
so there's no link?
There's no link at this point.
Okay, so it looks like there's plans going forward into the future, and you've got quite a well-organised machine looking after different aspects of the community.
And one of the things that we're very proud of in Newcastle is that we have a daily minyan, morning, noon and night. And there's a committed band of people who come to minyan in the morning and in the afternoon and the evening, which is, I think, the envy of many, many small communities. That's one of the things that we want desperately trying to keep going.
That's given people a really good picture of what it's like to live here and take part in communal life.
It's a very nice community. Give it a try.
And thank you to everybody who made me feel very welcome, made a lot of new friends up in Newcastle when I was there. And you can look forward to hearing from Linda and Brenda from the Reform community. I chatted to them as well, and that's going to come up in a future programme. You're listening to JSCN, Radio for the Jewish Small Communities, with me, Ed Horwich. And if you're enjoying the programme, let me know. Send me an email, hello@jscn.org.uk. Just go to the website and send a message from there if you like. Now, I get asked to volunteer for various projects from time to time, and one of these is a project called My Voice, run jointly by AJR and the Fed in Manchester. It records the stories of Holocaust refugees and survivors, in their own words, together with their own archive photographs, and puts them into a book. A number of these books have in fact gone into the collection at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. Tomorrow is Yom HaShoah, the Jewish Holocaust Memorial Day, and many stories will be told then. I met a lovely lady, Helen Stein, whilst helping record her story. She was a small child who lived on the French-German border. This is just a part of her story, in her own words. That was the voice of Helen Stein. You're listening to JSCN, radio for the Jewish small communities. Now, we love getting your emails, and we get inquiries about all sorts of things from all manner of people, and if we can, we help, and most of the time we do. One such inquiry came from Mark Griffiths, the photographer in Wales, who is about to embark on a project documenting Holocaust survivors and refugees in Wales. I thought it'd be interesting to find out a bit more about his project, so I got Mark on the telephone line, which I'm afraid is a bit echoey, but we can still hear him. And I wanted to know just what the project was about and how he started his career in photography.
So I've been photographing, I started photographing in 2004. Then I went to university photojournalism in 2010. Since graduating, I've worked commercially and editorially for the last 4 or 5 years.
So what's your main thrust? Is that reportage, documentary?
It's mainly documentary photography, so I'm interested in long-term documentary stories. I'm interested in people's stories, people's ideas, and of course I'm interested in people themselves. So that's kind of what sort of gets me, interested in people's journeys and where they've come from and where they've been and what's happened in their life. That's the thing that really sort of enlightens me and allows me to sort of progress in my field. I think that's where my expertise is within portraiture.
Okay, so it's documentary portraiture mainly. And in terms of where we would see your paid work most of the time, is that in newspapers or where is it?
Yeah, so I work editorially. I work for the Telegraph magazine, Smith Journal, Financial Times, The Guardian. We did a piece with Channel 4 not so long ago on a documentary called One Punch. I work for a number of UK-based publications, so you can see it now and again in certain publications across the UK and internationally, of course. So that's where my bread and butter is, so to speak. And then, of course, I work commercially for a number of clients as well.
You wrote to me about a project that you want to do around Jewish refugees and Holocaust survivors. So what's the motivation for doing that? Right, the motivation is, so essentially I have a good friend who is a history teacher in a secondary school, and he was telling me that he teaches a class of 20, 12-year-olds. He said the first question that he asked is, can anybody put their hands up if they know or if they've heard about the Holocaust? And out of the class of 20, only 5 children put their hands up. And I thought that was astonishing. And obviously these kids are of a young age, but such a significant event in history, only a small minority knew about this event. And that got me thinking about, we need to spread the word of this, of course, and maybe educate a younger generation to understand exactly what has happened, what Jewish families and Jewish people have gone through during that period and their plight from Nazi Germany across to Wales. So then I saw an article in Wales Online, and it was a story about this Jewish refugee that had settled in Swansea, and her story was so fascinating. The fact that she was, of course, smuggled through the borders, and her parents, ultimately, they were sent to death camps. They perished in the Holocaust. And I just thought it was a real fascinating story. And then through researching and through talking with the Association of Jewish Refugees and a lady there called Catherine Previser, I got to understand that there was quite a lot of Jewish settlers in Wales. And that intrigued me to sort of maybe capture these people and maybe just investigate their stories in a greater depth, just to see what they had gone through. So that's what the outcome of the project will essentially be. Will be a depiction of each individual and obviously their narrative of what they went through and how they settled in Wales. And it'd just be interesting just to see, what they think of the country and how that compares to, obviously they may have very early memories of Germany, but if there's any nostalgia still, and if they have any memorabilia from the Holocaust or from their parents or from the transportation. So you're going to be collecting their stories as well as the photographs?
Yes, definitely. I'd like to see, just to compile this big narrative of their history and, of course, what they've gone through, essentially, just to sort of compile this really accurate depiction of the events.
So you mentioned the Association of Jewish Refugees. Is there any expectation that they're going to be involved in this project?
I would hope so. So Catherine, who I've been liaising with quite frequently, they're holding a meeting in April, at the end of April, sorry. Unfortunately, at the time, I will be away. I'm working on commission in Portugal, so I can't attend that. But she's going to address the group and put out the word that I will be photographing in Cathays in Cardiff on the 13th of May. So I'm hoping I'll get as much interest as possible because, as I said, this is something that should never be repeated. And of course, it's something that everyone needs to know about.
Well, it's a very timely interview because today is the 11th of April when we're recording this. Tonight they're going to be lighting the memorial candles for Yom HaShoah, which is the Jewish Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust. And tomorrow is Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah itself. There is already, I know, a project within the Association of Jewish Refugees, which is called My Voice. What you're doing as a project is quite interesting, but you're doing your project as a self-motivated, self-funded project.
It is, and the majority of my projects are self-funded. And that's the thing with photography in general, is that usually your work isn't commissioned, especially with long-term documentary work, until it's completed, because it's hard for an editor to envisage what the work is going to essentially look like until it's completed. Whether, of course, you have a film, you have a script. With photography, it's completely different. A lot of it's off the cuff. So the work does develop as it progresses. So I'll give you an example, of course. I worked on the last project I worked on was with 8 children from Chernobyl that were brought over from Belarus, and they stayed in Wales for a period of a month. And it was working in coherence with the Children's Chernobyl charity. And through scientific research, they investigated these children and, of course, did medical tests through, obviously, the number of years that they've been coming over to Wales. And what they found was that the radiation levels in their bloodstream can reduce by up to 60%, which prolongs their life. So it's projects that are really worthwhile, and through the exposure of this project, the Chernobyl Children Charity were able to secure additional funding, and they've been able to continue with this program for a number of years since. So it's these projects that I'm sourcing, it really is. I'm looking for something that really means something to me and is significant for other people as well. I think it's important to engage in something that is really worthwhile, and that is going to have an impact on other people, and especially with this one, it's going to have an impact on a younger generation. It's going to raise awareness of what happened during the Holocaust, and of course, it's going to tell a real accurate story of these people's plights and what they've had to endure to arrive in this country.
Well, I'm sure you're going to be hearing many, many very interesting and some profound stories. In terms, then, you do the work first, and then you get an organisation or a news agency or a magazine involved later on. So that's how you would be able to fund yourself at the end of the day. You have to do it for free, as it were, and then at the end of the day, somebody is then able to publish it, and that will pay for your time.
Exactly, yeah, that's exactly how it works. So what will happen is, of course, once the project is completed, I will look at potential suitable publications that will be looking to showcase the work, possibly looking at exhibition spaces that would look to use the work as well. So there are a number of publications that are particularly interested in historical events, and of course things like the Sunday Times magazine and the Financial Times Weekend magazine. They're always interested in engaging with historical events, and an event such as significant as this is, it'll be, certainly showcased, I would have thought, internationally, hopefully anyway.
So how long is this project going to run for? How much time have you given to it?
Well, at the moment, so the first photography session will be in Cardiff, or as I've mentioned, on the 13th of May. So we're going to see how that goes, gauge what the interest is firstly, and from there we'll potentially look to roll it out in other cities. So I'm looking to perhaps visit Swansea, and I know there's Aberystwyth has a strong settlement of Jewish people. So it could be perhaps a touring photographic project, and essentially I'm looking to sort of complete it within the next 3 to 4 months. So it will be run over the duration of the summer.
And when do you expect that the general public will actually get to see some of this work?
So usually I don't show any of the work until it's completed, because I think the narrative can change so much within photography projects. So of course I may photograph a number of people on the 13th of May, and then of course I'll photograph another event, and the narrative could perhaps change. So that will be, so I'm probably looking to air this out to the public towards the end of August, I would have thought.
Okay, so that's going to be very interesting to see at the end of the day.
Definitely, yes.
Good luck with the project, Mark. I hope it goes well, and if we can be involved in it any way, we would love to be. I look forward to seeing the end result.
Thank you. I will keep you updated and let you know how it goes.
Well, that's it for another show. It's been lovely having you. Please do send me an email. Tell me where you are. Where have you been listening from? And if you've got any questions, I'd like to hear those too. And don't forget, we've got more from Jake about what it's like to be Jewish in Finland. We're going to hear from Linda and Brenda in Newcastle. And we've got the Full Bagel coming from York as well. And if you're going to be in Bristol on the 10th of June, I'm going to be at the Bristol and Southwest Linwood. So anybody in the Southwest, I'd love to see you there. Drop me a line ahead of time if you especially want to see me. The following weekend, we have, on the 17th of June, I'm going to be in Sheffield, hopefully spending the weekend there as well. We're doing a JSCN regional meeting for the small communities. So everybody from Lincoln, Nottingham, Leicester, Hull. If you want to travel down from York, travel down from Leeds, we'd love to see you. Anybody within striking distance, come along. I'm going to be in Sheffield over the weekend. I hope to meet with everybody there. Looking forward to it very much. And I'm looking forward to being with you next time on JSCN, Radio for the Jewish Small Communities.